Okay, so Winston's Wish works with families who have got a military connection all over the UK, with thanks to our Help for Heroes funding. So this means that we can go and visit a family where children have been bereaved of a really important person in their life who had a connection to the military. So that person may have been serving at the time that they died, or they may have been a veteran who had served for many years or a few years, and perhaps years after leaving the military maybe got poorly, or the types of death that we work with in families with a military connection is really varied. Sometimes there are bereavements through in-action combat, there are sometimes bereavements through people being poorly while they're serving or poorly afterwards. Sometimes it could be a suicide or homicide bereavement as well. So the cause of death in our families with a military connection really varies. And so therefore the work that we do with each family can vary from one to the other. And that sort of sums up our work in general anyway. We try and support each family with what they need and what they would find most helpful, because no two families grieve in the same way, although there are often things in common between the families that we work with, perhaps worries or upset, concerns and fears that they have. Maybe we hear a couple of different families having the same fears, same worries, same feelings, but each of them are grieving the loss of a really unique person to them. So we try and make sure our support is as unique for them as well, so really what they need.
And how, if at all, does a bereavement in the military differ from other types of bereavement?
I suppose in a way, when... No, I need to include the question. Sometimes when we're working with a family where the person who died was connected to the military, it may mean that the build-up to a child's bereavement could be a little bit different than if their important person was home all the time. It might mean that the person who died was often away, often spending months away from the family home. Now, of course, they can write letters, they can phone, use Skype, but that's not always possible. When somebody's away with military work, it's not always possible to speak all of the time. And unfortunately, if a child was bereaved and of a person they were used to not seeing for long periods of time, it can complicate the understanding and the permanence of their bereavement. They can find it quite hard to understand that whoever that is, whether it's mum or dad or their sibling, isn't coming back because they're used to them going away for a long period of time. So that can be very difficult. But people in families where there is a military connection often experience similar grieving journeys to those of the families that we work with where there isn't a military connection. But sometimes also, if the death was maybe in combat, then perhaps there might be a lot of media coverage. There might be quite a traumatic story that a child will learn of their loved one going through. And so sometimes those things can make it differ from other stories, but often that they are similar as well to other families who don't have a military connection. And even with those families where they have that military connection through the person who died and through their way of life, it really varies from one to the next, their feelings towards that military connection. When their loved one has died, it may be that the military connection is really, really important for them and they hold on to it. But for some families, they really don't want to be associated with the military anymore, and that can be for a variety of reasons. And so we really try and respect that at Winston's Wish, and we try and recognise that not everybody wants to hold on to that connection to the military.
And for parents or carers or professionals talking to military children that have been bereaved, what language should they use? Is there certain phrases they should be, wary of using, or?
So the language that we use at Winston's Wish when we talk to children in their bereavement support is we do use words that maybe sometimes people don't want to use. So we won't say passed away, we will say that somebody has died. And that is the same really for working with a family when it's been a military bereavement. We try and use very clear language, and it can be really scary to want to use that language with a very young child particularly. However, children can sometimes struggle with the language that we might use as adults to try and protect children. If we start coming up with different imaginative ways of explaining where their loved one now is, sometimes we say that maybe they've gone to the moon, or sometimes people say that they're a star in the sky, and these are all very kind words to be using, but it can also really confuse a child because they sometimes don't understand that they're going to a grave and the person's in the ground, but they're also being told they're in the sky. And so often children can feel a bit confused by the different language that adults use, solely because they want to look after the child and they want to say it in a very gentle way. So we will use words such as, for example, if it was their dad, we would say that their dad has died rather than passed away, because it's clearer and it helps the child to understand the permanence of death. So we use those words, but we are also gentle with using them. And so I would encourage, even, in the military, there's a lot of military language that can be confusing. It can be a language that maybe children haven't heard before. So I think it's just being selective with which words we use and just making them very clear, and answering questions that children have. If they say that they're confused about how can he be in the sky, how can he be in the ground as well, it's okay to have those questions and have those conversations. And often if children are asking, they tend to be ready to hear an answer that you think is appropriate for them.
And what can military families do to remember the person that they've lost?
So a military family may have more days in the year where they have moments where they want to remember their person who has died. By those I mean sort of remembrance days for all military people. Is that the word? I don't know what word to use. Military families maybe have other days in the calendar where they are asked to think about their important people in their lives who have died. For example, Remembrance Sunday can be another day for those families to have a think about that person. However, working with families, we know that those days of remembrance are not necessarily those key dates only. It can just be walking to the shops, they see something and it makes them remember the person. And often the anniversaries or key dates in the year, there's a lot of feelings towards them, and then sometimes on the day, the feelings that the family have aren't what they thought they would be. And so we try and encourage that any day can be a day to remember that person, any moment, any funny memory. And so we often work with families and encourage them to have memories, make memory jars, memory boxes. And in some families that I've worked with where the person who died had a connection to the military, they maybe create a book of all the photos of that person's life in the military, all of the work that they did. They also sometimes keep hold of their medals. Sometimes they can get hold of some uniform, and then families sometimes put that in their memory box, or they might frame it. It might go in a special box and they just choose to look at it sometimes rather than it always being there. So families who have a military connection can get support through Winston's Wish in the same way as any other family, and that's, to begin with, that can be through our drop-ins, it can be through our helpline. So our drop-ins are in all different places, and the information and times, dates and locations are all on our website. And then also the contact number for our helpline is on there. It's 08088 020 021, and you're very welcome to phone that number to make a referral, but also phone the number just to chat to somebody, get some support. You might just have a question about what language to use with your children, or you might have, maybe you're a teacher and there's a child in the school that you work in who you want to be able to support, and of course you can phone the helpline about any of these things. And also our drop-ins are just a way to connect with practitioners in person, so if you can get to one of those, they're a really helpful way to get support too.